Okay, good morning. So the purpose of today's workshop is just to provide an overview of the revised draft zoning bylaw that we presented to council last week. We'll take a look at the process to date, as well as the overview of a proposed zone structure in the new bylaw. We're going to walk through some of the proposed mapping, just to help outline how the proposed zoning bylaw conforms with the town's official plan and help to identify some of those larger zone changes. We will also include a discussion of legal non-conforming uses, and we'll end with a discussion on the proposed process to deal with some Planning Act legislation where, when we're doing a comprehensive zoning bylaw review like this, which results in a repeal and replace of the bylaw, there are some policies that then come into effect. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll outline our next steps. So just some of the process to date. In 2015, Council received a background paper which helped to highlight a few discussion areas. Then in the fall of 2016, Council received the first draft of the bylaw, which we then released for public consultation. We held a council workshop as well as an open house in October of 2016, and the public meeting was held in December. Since that time, we've received about 50 comments and have had approximately 15 meetings with interested parties, as well as developers and the general public. We've discussed the proposed bylaw many times at our development services counter through general inquiries. Anyone inquiring about a property, we do make them aware about the ongoing zoning bylaw review process. And in response to comments received and town staff's ongoing review of the document as well, we've just released the second draft for further public consultation. So this map just helps to show who we have received written comments from. And it's kind of scattered across the town. We've also had a number of other people who haven't necessarily provided written comments, but they've asked questions and inquired about it. And we've had people asking. We've met with a couple of residents as well. With respect to the proposed zone structure, the new proposed bylaw consists of 33 zone categories compared to 41 in our current bylaw. This was a reduction from the first draft, which had 34. And the reason for that being we are now proposing to remove the agricultural zone that was being proposed in the first draft. As noted previously, some of our existing zones in our current bylaw have been recategorized. With respect to if they were commercial, we've now moved them into more of a mixed-use zone. The other point I'd like to make on this slide is while it says there's only 9 zones for residential, there are 4 subzones within the new R2 zone, so that you could essentially call that 12 zones. Just to start our discussion about the mapping, we thought we would start with some history about a past conformity exercise that we've already done for the Oak Ridges Moraine. In 2003 to 2006 approximately, following the provincial release of the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, the town worked with the province directly to complete our Oak Ridges Moraine conformity exercise. This resulted in OPA 116, OPA 117, and Zoning Bylaw 2003-64. Coming out of that zoning, you'll see the the mapping that's currently in effect. It resulted in 5 different zones: the Oak Ridges Moraine Core, Core Buffer, Countryside, Core Linkage, and our Aggregate Extraction Zone. As a result of this review, we're not necessarily looking to change that zoning too much. The one point I did want to make is when this conformity exercise was done, that also removed some permitted uses in certain areas. It also included site plan control and limits on home additions and things like that. The goal of the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan was to protect that significant ecological resource. This map, you'll see some of the proposed changes through this bylaw. With respect to mapping, we are looking to combine the Oak Ridges Moraine Core and Core Buffer Zone into one zone because they were basically subject to the same policies. We would also like to help streamline the site plan process for all properties within the Oak Ridges Moraine in order to help simplify the process for homeowners and the agricultural industry. Since then, the Greenbelt Plan came into effect, which you can now see on the screen in the light green color. In 2010, Council adopted a new official plan, which brought the town's official plan into conformity with the Greenbelt Plan, among a number of other provincial plans. This zoning bylaw review is intended to bring the zoning bylaw, the town's zoning bylaw, into conformity with that official plan, as well as the Greenbelt Plan. So here you can see some of the proposed zone categories within the Greenbelt Plan area, as well as the white belts. The pink areas represent the town's current community areas. The majority of the Greenbelt is proposed to be zoned rural. As noted, the first draft did have an agricultural and rural zone split. We've proposed to just combine them back into one rural zone. The only difference between the two was group homes are permitted in the rural area, but not the agricultural zone. So we've removed the permission in the revised bylaw for group homes in the rural area completely. It's something we're still looking at as to whether we want to permit them in certain areas. According to our official plan, we can't have them in agriculture. They're not permitted in agricultural areas. So that's just one consideration we're still looking at. A large portion of the Greenbelt Plan area, as you can see in the green, is proposed to be zoned environmental protection. And that was consistent with the natural heritage system study that was done as part of the official plan. Some of the smaller areas you see are the yellow areas, which are the estate residential as well as the hamlet residential areas. The blue areas you see up here are associated with marinas. There is a few rural industrial areas shown in gray. Oh, sorry, this one in there. As well as a few institutional areas, I-1, which is typically associated with cemeteries, some of our existing cemeteries. And the orange areas you see are usually associated with golf courses and or trailer parks, as up on Highway 48 there. Just wanted to focus a bit on the environmental protection zone, as this is a big change through this zoning bylaw. The environmental zone has been expanded to appropriately zone the environmental protection area designation in the official plan. Since the first draft, we have gone back and we are still reviewing the mapping, but you can see the previous EP zone in the light green underneath. Sorry, I need my pointer. Up in this area, all of that was previously EP zone in the first draft. Since then, we've gone back and taken a look at the orthophotography and tried to remove where there's existing houses or existing farmlands. We've removed those from the proposed environmental protection zone. So that's something we are still refining. The draft zoning bylaw does allow for the environmental protection zone boundary to be modified based on site-specific environmental work. So if someone comes forward and they've done some environmental work on their site-specific property, that would essentially delineate where that zone boundary for the environmental protection zone is. One of the other things to mention is we're not looking to remove people's rights for a house on their property. So if you see there's a lot of green up in that northeast corner. If you have a vacant existing lot of record that's completely within the environmental protection zone, the zoning bylaw would allow for a single detached dwelling to be constructed on that property. It would also, any legally existing uses, such as some agricultural uses, would also be allowed to continue. We just wanted to zoom in on this mapping to show some of the detailed mapping on the orthophotography. So we've chosen this area to help with our discussion of legal non-conforming uses. This area is located within the Provincial Greenbelt Plan area, and it's along the boundary of King Township, which is why you're not seeing any red lines or proposed zoning on the other side of the road there, on the west side. You can see the majority of the area is proposed to be zoned environmental protection for good reason. With some of the existing uses, the existing houses and cleared areas proposed to be zoned rural. The property outlined in blue is currently zoned M2 or industrial in our current bylaw. This would permit a range of industrial uses as well as outdoor storage, among other uses. In conformity with the town's official plan and the Greenbelt Plan, this lot, through this bylaw, is proposed to be zoned rural. Section 414 of the draft bylaw deals with legal non-conforming uses and buildings. Both the Greenbelt Plan, the town's official plan, as well as the zoning bylaw, the proposed zoning bylaw, would permit the continuation of the legally established use on the property, which in this case appears to be a garage. What would be removed is the list of all the other permitted uses under the current M2 zone, which don't conform to the Greenbelt Plan and the town's official plan. such as other industrial uses, any just outdoor storage that's not associated with the use. So those permissions would propose to be removed.
Question? Go ahead.
Thank you. So this site right here has a legal non-conforming,
If the new bylaw was put into effect, this would be considered a legal non-conforming use.
but right now it has a legal M2 zoning on that site.
Correct.
Maybe I can further with that. So you were talking about outdoor storage, and that would not be permitted.
An outright outdoor storage use would not be. There would be some permissions associated with if whatever the use is today. If there are some associated outdoor storage, that could continue.
We know this property. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Well-
And sorry, I just picked this as an example.
no.
I'm not saying everything
No, no,
here
no.
is
And I'm
legal.
not speaking specifically
Okay.
to this property
It
at
was
all.
just an example.
Yeah, no, it's a good example.
Okay.
I just, and I know I've said this before, I have a serious problem going in and down zoning or taking away established legal permissions. If this was a legal non-conforming use already and, you know, they use it for what they're using it for until the time they sell it or change the use, so be it. Hey, that's the situation we currently have. But when we have something that's been established, that could have been purchased, could have paid for an application to make it this, and then we go in and we take that use away, I don't think that's right. And you're saying that this would then become a legal non-conforming use. So if the use was to change or these individuals were to sell this property, then it flips back into a rural zone?
The use could continue.
Use, okay.
That use can continue as long as it's continuously the use for that
The
purpose.
use that's for that property, but they no longer would have the use of the permissions under an M2
They
zoning.
couldn't sell it to establish a new industrial use on the property.
Yeah, that's a fundamental flaw in this process that I think that's probably where we're going to see most of our issues come from going through this process. So that's my 2 cents.
Councillor Johnson.
That is a concern. This property, and I'm talking generally, it could be any property, may have come into the town and applied for a zoning change. They've paid for that zoning change. It's been examined and determined by the town that they could do the uses that were approved, wherever that might be. And now they would be faced with only the uses that they had settled into, which I understand that if they're satisfied with that, if we knew that an owner of a property was satisfied to limit themselves to those uses, then that would be fine. But if they have the right to several uses and are now being cut back from that list, I think that's unfortunate, and I have a concern with that. I didn't know that's where we were going with this. I also wonder how we're going to identify where those properties are to let these people know that this is happening to their property. They may be preparing to sell, somebody may be preparing to purchase, and so on. And again, as Councillor Young has just brought up, what if they purchased this based on that a few years ago, based on the list, and now this is being changed? How will we notify them? Again, if they are satisfied with that, I don't have any problem. If you have a list of the 200 properties or whatever that are affected, and 97 of them have agreed, yes, that's fine, and then we're going to work with the others, that would be okay too. But there is a concern if these people don't know this is happening to their property.
So just with respect to letting people know, the one thing that we've done in response to council's concerns about trying to let everyone know, which I think Nick mentioned, was putting an insert into the tax bills that are going out in June. And what that says is just announcing that the town is doing this process, and that they should contact me to figure out how or if their property is impacted. So that's a direct way we're getting out to the majority of the properties, if not all of them, just to let them know that this process is going on. But this is just one example. There could be a lot of other properties where they have a rural zoning and they're now going to, part of their property is environmental. So it's not just going from an M2 to a rural, it's also those properties going from, it could be, I've had a lot of people call me because they're They were agriculture, or they were rural, and they were originally proposed to go to agricultural, but they're back to rural, and that was a concern to them. They considered that a significant impact to them, even though the policies were the same, if not providing a wider range of agricultural related uses. So it's hard for staff to start pinpointing properties that are considered to be impacted, because essentially this is a town-wide bylaw that impacts every single property in the town.
I think, in listening to this, the definitions of the particular designations are going to be extremely important. Some people have a predetermined what agriculture is or what is rural, and some people feel that they're interchangeable. Other people have a closer definition. It may not even be the definition that we're using. So I think that's going to be important in itself, to make sure that we continue to use the phrases that, or the designations that we're going towards, and what the difference is between where they are now and where we're heading. And I think that will help people. There may be some that causes more concern, but at least if people understand what the designations actually mean, I think that's important. Councillor Roy DiClemente, and then Councillor Persicini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to staff, I understand we'll just use this as an example. Right now, this is industrial, it's M, it's got a wide range of uses. Can you explain what our incentive, or why we would want to introduce the concept that we would be removing individual property rights or individual land uses through this process? So what's the rationale here in moving it out of what's existing there now and changing it to something else, limiting those use? I'm thinking also of some of the policies in the source protection, the source water protection plans that talk about trying to identifying areas that we want to protect, and working with landowners to ensure that the uses that they're taking aren't going to negatively impact source water or drinking water protection zones. So I'm trying to put that into context here, and I want to understand why we would want to go from an industrial zoning that exists on that property with that basket of uses and remove that for those property owners.
Sure, through the mayor to all of council. So there's a lot of, when we did our official plan, there was a lot of focus from provincial policy, the growth plan, the provincial policy statement, the Greenbelt plan, the Oak Ridges Marine plan, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. All those plans work together to try and focus the uses, such as employment uses, residential uses, to your urban areas. You want to focus them in certain areas, and you want to protect other areas, such as the Oak Ridges Marine and the Greenbelt plan, for agricultural uses, for the significant environmental features that are there. So in doing a conformity exercise through the official plan, we identified areas that had some designations. So we do have those, as I showed you in a previous map. There are some designations out there that do allow for some uses to continue, but you also can't establish an estate residential area out in the middle of nowhere anymore. It's just not something that's supported through provincial policy. You want to try and direct those commercial, industrial, residential uses to where you have your services and those people, and you want to protect the other areas for those other uses. So doing the conformity exercise helps identify where you want those uses and protect those areas, the other areas for the agricultural uses and your environmental uses.
Sorry, could I add further before, just, if we look at the example that's on the screen right now, this is an area this is in the Greenbelt. So if we had a blank slate here today, and we're looking at, what should the zoning be on this property, there's no doubt in my mind that at best they'd be a rural property, if not environmental protection. When you look at the environmental protection zone that's proposed around it, when you look at the Greenbelt, or similarly in the Oak Ridges Moraine, or even in the LSPP, you look at a 30-meter buffer from the environmental protection zone. So what you've got here is pretty dense forest. If I were to add a 30-meter buffer around this, you'd pretty much, the whole area would be environmentally protected. So when we look at the Greenbelt Plan or the LSPP, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, and we look at getting into conformity with those plans, when we come around to doing the zoning, what we're looking at is closer conformity. I mean, in this case, we don't want to take away the legal use that's on the site, and we want to allow that person to continue the use on the site. But at the same time, our goal, both stated in our policies in our official plan and in the provincial policies through the Greenbelt Plan, are to get into conformity with those documents. So over time, yes, I understand you don't want to take away the rights and the additional uses, but certainly, I guess the thing is, we wouldn't want it to get any worse than what it is right now. So what we'd want is they can continue the use that's on the site right now, but over time, you'd want it to come into closer conformity. Hopefully, a future user might buy the place, turn it into a home, allow the trees to start growing back in, get rid of the outdoor storage, get rid of the industrial use altogether. That would be long-term what you'd hope to see on a property like this, and there are examples throughout the town like it.
I have Councillor Roy DeClemente is going to finish, Councillor Persicini, and then Councillor Young. Go ahead.
Thank you. I recognize and understand and support the idea of, look, this is the green belt, this is the environmental protection area, we want to protect it and so on, but we can't be expected to be able to go back into history, go back in time and correct the errors of what may have been done, given that the people in the past were not enlightened as far as what needed to be protected and what was environmental. It's like trying to ask the city of Toronto to not have built the Gardiner where it is, or to have put more subway stops in when they were building it when it was cheaper and easier. We can't go back in time and fix that. And I have an issue with taking away property rights from people who have perhaps long-standing ties or a long-standing business or a long-standing understanding of what they were able to do on those pieces of land. And while we may know that that's not appropriate for that space, and we may hope that in future that we could rezone and have that encouraged appropriate uses, I have a problem with going back in time and trying to correct the errors of the past. And that's really what it feels like at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Persicini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I echo everything that Councillor Roy DeClemente said, but I also like to add, if we're sending a tax bill notifying the changes, wouldn't it be only the right thing to do is to have a special meeting, open meeting to all the people who can ask questions and answers, give them all the answers to asking questions, and we see so they understand a little bit if there are going to be some changes, why we're making these changes, for the better for them or for the better for everyone else involved. So we should have a special meeting after they send the tax bill to notify them, to let them know what we're doing and get some feedback from the people who are involved. That's my suggestion.
I believe we have an opportunity to have them back here, both meeting with you individually and as a public meeting as well, following
Yep.
the notification.
So we have 2 public open houses, one coming up next week and one to be held in September. And yes, they are encouraged to ask planning staff, and we are more than welcome to meet with anyone to discuss their own specific property.
Most people, they sometimes say, okay with the changes, not all everybody, but if they understand, why the direction we're going for the future of their kids and their grandchildren, they may say, maybe we'll fine tune it, or here's my feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just on that, I've met with a number of people where I've identified that we are proposing to rezone some of their property to environmental protection. And a lot of those people, surprisingly, are fine with that. Oh, yes, we would love to protect those trees, so that's fine. As long as I can do this, my maple syrup and so we walk through that with them, just to let you know.
It's not all bad news.
It's not all bad news. I haven't got to the good news yet.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Look, if folks with their properties are free and willing to make the change, then have at it. But there are those out there that probably aren't, and looking at some of these properties, I think I would be in the same position for good reason. I'm not here to, again, affect somebody's existing legal use or property rights. If there are areas which we will be protecting where these uses can no longer be expanded, or these uses can be put into an area because it's not in conformity with what we're trying to do, we're 100% in the right. But going through and taking a property that has a legal use and downzoning it without the permission or the consent of the property owner, current property owner, I think is wrong. Again, I understand when we look at certain areas, yes, there should be environmentally protected areas. There are areas that should respect Oak Ridges Moraine and the Greenbelt. And we are protecting, we have been protecting them. But we're trying to do the same thing. We've got a province that's come in that's done the east side of Woodbine Avenue and then over into, Davis Drive and that and 404 that we want pulled out for commercial and employment uses. So we're kind of in the same boat here where we're telling these folks, you have an existing use, we want to take it away, yet we're trying to flip what the province has said we want to see as a greenbelt area and protected to turn it over for the benefit of the municipality. So I think in some respects we might be talking out of both sides here. But as it relates to these specific properties, I have no intention and no desire whatsoever to take away anyone's use. Legal conforming use.
So on that, if I may ask a question, I guess from staff's perspective, it would help us to understand, is the concern that that use would become legal non-conforming or that they would lose the other permitted uses in that zone? Or is it both?
Madam Mayor, if I may, it's both.
Okay.
I have a use. This is my legal use. I should be able to keep it. Whether I want to put outside storage on there or not, I'm permitted to do so. If I choose that, hey, I've had enough of this, I want to move on and do something else, that's the way I should be able to market and dispose of my property because it is a legal use. And somebody else might find great value with M2 zoning and having outside storage. At one point, M2 zoning around here was like gold, because where else do you get outside storage? So, that's my answer.
Mr. Pelagic?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. So, I mean, the point's well taken. I think all the councilors are in agreement. So I think at this point, I mean, if you want to leave this specific issue with us as staff, then we will look at a couple options for coming forward with ways to move forward on this, and then we'll report back at the next opportunity.
Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't want to make this as a disagreement with what a member of council has said, but Councillor Roy DeClemente said that it was these would be a mistake of the past, and I can't possibly think of that as this example or any of the other examples as a mistake of the past. What these are is some private individual with a piece of land that's trying to earn a living from that land, no different than a farm might try to earn a living from their land, and they're trying to provide a service, whatever it might be, and if that service was needed in the community, they would be still in business. If it wasn't needed, they wouldn't be able to stay in business. They'd have to alter to something else. And it may even be providing employment in certain cases. So all those things were part of what the community needed. The community didn't need to have the green belt and so on and so forth at that time. So don't think of it as a mistake. I think it's just an evolution of time. But I still would like to protect the people who do want to, as I said, earn a living and create employment and provide a service in the community. They evolved to fill a need. And so I'm still supportive of them being able to do that on both the non-conforming, the variety of uses. I don't have a problem if the owner of the property signs off on the variety of uses and says, I'm happy, yeah, I got 10 uses and now I'm happy with the 5 that remain to me. I'm okay with that. But it's trying to find that out from people and have them agree to that and not be able to say, and not have to say in a few years, well, we had a little sign that said, the town of East Gwillimbury is hereby reviewing the zoning bylaw, and people, it goes right over people's heads. They're busy people. So somehow we need to get in touch with individual residents and have them understand this, that they are, if they don't comment, they are signing off. But I need to make sure they know that it may affect their property.
So just further to that, I agree with you in terms of the evolution of time. Those individual properties throughout the town were zoned over time in accordance with the policies of that day. The policies have changed, and that's why we're doing this exercise now. So just to provide a bit of context there.
I just had a couple of questions
Sure.
as well. One would be that Do we have an understanding, do residents who are in the Oak Ridges Moraine and in the Greenbelt have a clear understanding of what their limitations are living in that Greenbelt and Oak Ridges Moraine, and the some prohibitive uses? I'll start with that one.
Sure. To answer your question, I don't think they get the full extent of that. A lot of people don't know about the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan or the Greenbelt Plan. Whenever I say Greenbelt, people think, oh, I don't have environmental. But the Greenbelt is more than just the environmental, and it was put in place to do environmental as well as agricultural production. We get people coming in through this process, and I say, oh, well, you're on the Oak Ridges Marine, and they go, no, I'm not. Yes, you were put in the Oak Ridges Marine was put in place over 15 years ago, and they still don't know their zoning is Oak Ridges Marine. When the Oak Ridges Marine was done, it was very restrictive. We're trying to massage the policies in order to make it and simplify it a bit, but it is very restrictive, and that was done through the province, and that did create a lot of legal non-conforming situations in itself. What I like to tell people is, when new policies are changed and things become legal non-conforming uses, and those legally existing uses can continue, you wouldn't even know the zoning changed, because it still looks the same and it still functions the same. They just have lost all of the other range of uses that they may have had before. So to put that in a bit of context, I don't think people understand what the provincial plans have put out there.
In having discussions with some of the residents about the zoning changes, it seems to me that they're not understanding what's happening in the Greenbelt and the Oak Ridges Marine, and this is another layer that I think we're going to see from residents who feel that there's restrictions on their property. They're going to tie it to the zoning change. However, they are within the Oak Ridges Marine and the Greenbelt. So I think that if we're not aware of it, we certainly should be, that is going to create some more questions and a lot of information that needs to be exchanged with residents on that as well. The other question that I had, we do know from time to time that we have businesses, and everybody's talked about the right of landowners to continue if they have an operation to continue to do so. We do have some as well that may be a little more less visual, and I'm suspicious that perhaps not a permitted use at this time that may fall within this zoning as well. And I think we should be well aware of that people maybe started out as a little small mom and pop business, that it was just for a few neighbors, and it has grown because of a need for the community, but also a need for them to earn a wage. And they now are going to be in a very different position than those that are speaking here today, and that they have permission, and we want to make sure that they continue to have the permission. They perhaps don't have the permission, and now it is going to be very restricted. So I think that's another layer that we're going to have with this whole process, are people that are in that category as well, either didn't know, or whether it has become something much greater than they ever expected, and just didn't get into the town to get the proper paperwork done. This is going to require some time as well for people to understand.
Great. So I'll continue on. So we just wanted to go over the employment zones. So moving out of the Greenbelt and Oak Ridges Marine into more of our community and employment areas. The employment zones, as previously mentioned, have been restructured to implement the official plan. So you can see the two zones that are being proposed line up with the general and prestige employment land use designations, with the M1 prestige employment for more cleaner uses completely contained within buildings, and that M2 general employment for a wider range of employment uses with some exceptions for those outdoor storage uses. So here you'll see our map of our employment lands town-wide, and within those areas you'll see the two different zones that are being proposed. So we are proposing to pre-zone some of the employment lands For example, the Queensville employment lands are all currently, most of them are zoned rural right now. So one of the things we're doing through this is pre-zoning them M1 or M2, depending on the land use designation, to further entice employment uses here. So hey, with the zoning's there, you now have to just come in and get site plan approval. And servicing, and servicing is another key one. But again, it's just another way to entice employment uses within the town. The only exception being the 404 corridor secondary plan area. Until such time as the secondary plan is complete and has identified those land use designations, this area is proposed to be zoned rural at this time in accordance with the agricultural long-term growth area designation, and that would be similar along the Green Lane corridor as well. So one of the newer items within this proposed zoning bylaw is the introduction of new mixed-use zones, which help to implement the official plan in terms of the focus on centers and corridors. And here you'll start to see some of those proposed mixed-use zones throughout the town. So the town, again, will be looking to rezone those village core areas as well as the Queensville Center for those mix of uses to try and encourage the mix of uses within those areas. The only exception being in Sharon, where we are proposing the mixed-use zone, but with a holding symbol, until such time as there's servicing available that would allow for that wider range of uses. With respect to the commercial zones, these primarily focus on pre-existing commercial areas that have some commercial zoning, but they also help to implement the community and neighborhood commercial land use designations of the official plan. And you can see some of the commercial zones that have been added to the map in addition to the mixed use zones. And they're spread primarily throughout the town to provide those neighborhood and community commercial areas. The proposed zone structure for residential zones is categorized, again, I think we discussed this last time, but is categorized based on dwelling type.
Excuse me, just a question
Sure.
before you move along.
Yep.
Yeah, before we
going
move
back?
into residential,
Sure.
this morning, earlier, we saw all of the different concept zones or whatever for along the Green Lane corridor.
Yep.
Some of which are not firm yet. They will be changed and modified and the
Right.
shapes and so on.
Yep.
So what step happens to ensure that that plan fits into this plan? If you have you have a couple of areas marked out there that may not be exactly the same shape as what the gentleman was proposing this morning, and you have a lot of areas there that are not mapped out at all as to what he was mentioning. So how exactly does one, I imagine that this would be passed before the,
Yes. Well, that's the
before
intent.
the Green Lane plan?
That's the intent through you, Madam
Yes.
Mayor. As I mentioned, so the current uses you're seeing now up on the screen are what they are currently have a designation in the official plan. Because they're, well, Yonge and Green Lane has some existing uses there. And the ones along Yonge Street there, or sorry, Leslie Street, south of, over here for you. Oh, I can't do it on the TV. Over just south of Sharon there, those are currently designated in our official plan. All of the rest of Green Lane is currently designated agricultural/long-term growth area until such time as the Green Lane secondary plan is adopted and in effect, which would determine those specific land use areas. Once that happens, and again, it is a timing issue, the proposed timing for this is the end of this year. The proposed timing for the Green Lane secondary plan is the first quarter of next year, which it then still has to go to the region for approval. So it is a timing thing, but so we were just proposed to zone it rural at this time, or environmental, depending. The environmental would carry through because that has been determined in the Green Lane. But the rest would be rural at this time until such time as the Green Lane plan comes into effect. And then council could decide, okay, we want to go and pre-zone those areas, or in certain areas where you have the mixed use and things like that, you might want to do that. Or you just wait for the individual applications to come in with their zoning and subdivisions or site plans.
Thank you, go ahead.
Just on that, the mixed use zones that are being proposed would help to implement those designations. That is the intent. So just with respect to residential, as mentioned, it's categorized based on building type. As also discussed, the R2 zone covers all single detached dwellings within our new subdivisions primarily. And you can see there, it currently has 4 subzones, so that's just based on lot frontage. So moving on, I just wanted to talk about some of the Planning Act legislation that comes into effect. Because this is a new slide, sorry, this was added from your, I apologize. This was added because we noticed it wasn't there, and it was outlined in the staff report that was received last week. Because that we are doing a comprehensive zoning bylaw review and town staff will be recommending a complete repeal of the existing and a replace with this new one. There is a section in the Planning Act that then would apply, which would say, which doesn't allow for specific zoning bylaw amendment applications within 2 years of council's repeal of the existing and replacing with the new bylaw. But it does allow council to pass a resolution to say there are certain types of zoning bylaw amendment applications we would deal with within that 2 years. And so staff has tried to outline what types of applications you might deal with within the 2-year time frame. Those would include an application that we've received and has already been deemed complete before we've approved the new bylaw. One that's submitted with a draft plan of subdivision. So if you have an area that's designated for residential uses, you would consider a zoning bylaw amendment that came in with a subdivision plan for those lands. The reason we can't pre-zone residential lands is because, as I just noted, the residential lands are very specific to the dwelling type, so it really does matter the makeup of that subdivision. The next would be an application to remove a holding symbol. So if someone has dealt with their criteria and satisfied the criteria to remove the holding symbol, then we should be able to deal with those applications within the next 2 years. Further to the discussion we just had, if we've done our secondary plans and someone wants to come in and implement a zone within those secondary plan areas, I think we would want to encourage that within the next 2 years. We would deal with, this is just staff's proposal again, an application for a temporary use zoning bylaw. And there is a policy in our official plan that allows conversion of existing dwelling units within our local corridors and built boundaries to allow office uses and some retail commercial uses, I believe. We would consider a zoning to allow those conversions as well within the 2 years. So again, just a list that staff have put together primarily, but something we want to bring to council's attention. The other thing that should be on the slide is we would also want to include minor variance applications. That Planning Act policy would also apply to minor variance applications within the next 2 years. So we would want the opportunity to have people allow them to submit an application for a minor variance within the next 2 years. So just some of our next steps. As mentioned, we are having a public open house next week. It will be informal. One of the things we found that's worked well with the zoning bylaw is because everyone wants to come talk about their own individual property, which makes sense. The zoning bylaw is very site specific. We've set up, the intent is, which we did last fall, is set up computers, and just if people come in, we deal with them and talk about what their zoning is proposed to be and how it impacts them. So more informal, no formal presentation through those workshops or open houses. We will continue to work with those who have submitted comments already, and we will encourage people to continue to submit comments and deal with new comments that come in. Town staff are still reviewing the bylaw internally as well, and we're still reviewing the mapping. We will be holding another open house in September, and our intent is to present the final bylaw back to council with a recommendation for approval by the end of 2017. So I'm here for any further questions if there is any.
Any further questions? I have a couple of, just for clarification, did you have something? Okay, I have a couple, just, could you go over again the agricultural, rural, and the group home piece
Sure.
of that, please?
Sure. So the reason the first draft came out with a rural and agricultural zone split out into two is because in our official plan, we have two designations, a prime agricultural area and a rural area designation. And that is based on policies from the Greenbelt Plan. They're based on the types of soil and the types of agricultural land. That's how they're classified. There are specific policies, and they're generally the same. When it was put into the zoning, we noticed that the permissions were all the same with the exception of group homes. In our official plan, it says group homes are not permitted in the agricultural area designation, which then meant we couldn't allow it in those areas for zoning. So the one thing that we have done is we discussed internally, and again, still discussing, where would we like to see those group homes? I think from our perspective, you'd like to see them more in your urban areas where there's more amenities and things like that. So we've decided to, when we combined the agricultural and rural zone, because they were basically the same, we did remove the permission for group homes in the rural area zone designation as well. But if it is something council would like to see still permitted in that area, we could figure something out within the rural zone, whether it's a site specific in those areas for the group home permission or something like that.
And I suspect that we do have group homes within those areas now
Yep.
that would continue to be allowed.
Yep.
I see some that use the rural area as part of their programs. And perhaps some of their clients work better in a rural area than they do in an urban setting. So it's just something to think about as we move forward. I'm
Sure.
not sure from a group home perspective whether there are any applications at the provincial level pending or any interest at all, but I'm not sure that we would want to, if they were inclined to have a program that included country living, I'm going to call it that, then I would have to really think about whether that we would want to prohibit that based on their clientele.
Okay.
The other question that I had was regarding the residential zones.
Sure.
And today we're putting this program in, or we're contemplating the zoning for several years to come. Do we have enough flexibility within that should somebody come in front of us with some very innovative, out-of-the-box thinking as far as residential housing, only because people are going to be looking at different ways of family living and even single living based on the cost of housing. Have we got enough flexibility within these categories to make sure that we would be able to slot them into one of these zones?
So the definitions for some of the dwelling types are constantly reviewed and discussed in terms of our staff meetings, just because we always come up with different examples. Well, where would that fit in, and what's that considered? So it is something that is still discussed, and we do try and consider all different types. We try and look for examples around other municipalities that they've been dealing with the further south. And just seeing how they fit in with ours. So it is something still being reviewed, and we can take that back for sure.
I don't have anything preconceived at this time, but I don't want to limit ourselves.
Right.
If we have somebody that comes in with a wonderful idea and it's new and innovative and we would be willing to try it within our community for housing, I'd hate to see that we had limited ourselves. So.
Sure.
The third question I had was regarding the date in September. Have we selected a date in September? And the reason I'm asking that is a lot of people, even if they're not away, their mind is not on to dates, and I would hate to miss an opportunity to let people know throughout the summer. I think is probably not the best time, although if we can plan it now and announce it, then I think that there's an opportunity to make sure that we have everybody well aware of the meeting.
That's a good point. I don't think we have a date at this time, but maybe we can work with council's calendar at this time and see what date works best and move forward with
I
that.
think that would be really important, and our communications could get it out
Sure.
sooner than later before people get into holiday summer mode.
Yep, for sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Roy DeClemente.
If I may, I just wanted to come back to the group homes question for a moment. I think you raise a really valid point, Madam Mayor. If the Oak Ridges Moraine Act and the Greenbelt Protection Act and all of the provincial legislation would allow for a group home in the rural and the agricultural areas, I don't see why we would want to necessarily prohibit them, because for that very reason, it's part of their programming. We actually have group homes that run nurseries, for example, and so I think there's certainly a value in allowing for those sorts of uses to take place. The other one I wanted to note was was for daycares and nurseries and the nurseries with children, not nurseries with plants, and maybe even private schools, that there have often been people I know they've come to the counter and have asked about being able to set up a school in a rural area, and those are prohibited by, in some ways, some of the provincial legislation. But if there's a way to allow for those private facilities to be able to set up, I think that's something that would be helpful as we start to develop our community and want to bring in those sorts of assets that mesh well with our identity as a rural and urban community that's trying to make the best of both worlds. And perhaps if I could just step back a moment to my earlier comments where I said about the mistakes of the past, it was really just a question of decisions made without the enlightenment of current knowledge, I guess is the best way of putting it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. I'm sure that you are sleeping and breathing that one, and we appreciate the amount of time you've spent on it. I know it is certainly consuming for staff, but extremely important for our community and for our future. Could I have a motion to receive, please? Councillor Young,